I have the honor and pleasure to host our next debate. We gathered excellent experts from Poland, Hungary, Turkey, and the United States. You might have noticed already that those are the so-called troublemakers when it comes down to real liberal standards in democracy. I'm very pleased to introduce to you, to my very right, Nilgün Arizan Eralp, Director of the European Union Department at the Institute of the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey. György Dalos, Hungarian writer and historian, one of the founders of anti-communist opposition in the 70s. To my left, Adam Balcer, political scientist, now with WiseEUROPA, also at the Center for East European Studies of the University of Warsaw, and member of the European Council on European Affairs. And last but not least, welcome Charles Gatti, Hungarian American historian, professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. Welcome to Gdańsk, to Poland. Thank you very much for coming, for giving us food for thought, and I'm really looking forward to a fruitful discussion with you on the panel and with the audience later on. So, over the last years, the Western world has experienced an erosion of political center, which in its consequences is seen as a crisis of democracy. Phenomena like the Brexit referendum, the last presidential election campaign, Erdogan's policy towards opposition, or changes of the constitutional court here in Poland, they all make us, or liberal elites, worry. For the last elections in crucial EU member states, a further rise of populist and Eurosceptic forces was feared. So do the outcomes of the elections in the Netherlands, in Austria, in France justify cautious reassurance? What is going on in the societies with growing anti-liberal attitudes that actually now make us fear elections? Is the significant rise of illiberal or anti-liberal movements, parties, or even governments we are facing indeed a European or even global trend, answering globalization by trying to get back national control? But at the same time, each country has very specific arisings from peculiarities of national culture, history, religion, society, different economical conditions, and so on. However, if going back to business as usual seems not possible anymore, the crucial question is what future democracy will actually look like. Are the anti-liberal counter-revolutions creating new alliances, and will they create new types of leaders? Last but not least, how should we, defenders of liberal democracy, react to illiberal policies? So we have 1.5 hours for this very complex topic. After 2 rounds of statements on the panel, we will first focus on the analysis and second on the practical outlook. I will invite all of you in the audience to share your comments, ask questions, to enter the debate. So, as I just said, we will start with our first round and look into the analysis of sources. Nilgün, let me start with you.
Thank you.
Turkey, sorry, first my question. I will try to have a tailor-made question for you. Turkey has been following the democratic path for a very long time, developed tight connections to the EU, its membership to NATO, and is of high significance for the alliance. But the recent developments, especially from the last year, indicate a radical shift. The way the constitutional referendum was conducted, opposition party leaders, journalists, teachers got imprisoned in high numbers. The state of emergency introduced after the coup trial, Erdogan with almost unlimited power. So the question is it for Erdogan mainly a question of power and more power? Or is he actually following a specific ideology? What is his real vision of society and state? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I was going to say, I hope you haven't given me the floor because Turkey is the champion of the illiberal regimes in Europe. I want to regard it as I'm a lady, you have given me the floor first. And I would like to start by thanking to European Solidarity Center to be part of such an important panel where we'll discuss a crucial question. At least I don't feel alone. When you look at the recent developments in Turkey, you can think that Turkey is on the path of a general global trend of illiberal retreat, like in the other countries, by weakening democratic institutions and erosion of rule of law by a strong leader who came to power with elections. Of course, Turkey has common features with the other illiberal regimes, like elections function, though on a highly unlevel playing field. Official democratic institutions are still there, although there are many important obstacles for them to function. There's a strong leader. We have a strong leader. Some say he's charismatic. There's an enormous violation of civil liberties, as you say, and there's a mass support base. When I compare Turkey with the other countries, I mean, Turkey doesn't come from a socialist background, but AKP came to power in an unconsolidated democracy where it replaced military tutelage with its own tutelage. And thanks to the EU accession process, the so-called EU accession process, the AKP or Erdogan managed to do that. Unfortunately, he didn't use this opportunity to consolidate democracy or to remain a defective democracy, but he chose to establish an authoritarian system in Turkey. Like other illiberal regimes, the AKP regime in Turkey, or Erdogan's regime in Turkey, derives its legitimacy from a mass base. But this mass base hasn't been established due to the reaction of the globalization and neoliberal policies. But AKP empowered formerly excluded or alienated social groups of predominantly Islamic and until very recently Kurdish identity. So these constitute the mass base of AKP government. I regret to say that this is Islamic, rather uneducated and rural parts of Turkish society. This is the mass base. And political Islam, here comes your question, political Islam now plays an important factor in the current state system in Turkey. If you look at the education policies in Turkey, now they are geared towards raising a pious generation. Erdogan mentioned it clearly. So the main ideology of AKP now is to refashion Turkey's society along the lines of a political Islam and in an authoritarian system. Unfortunately, EU's exclusion of Turkey on an identity, religion and cultural basis strengthening the hands of the authoritarians in Turkey. Because Turkish society started to believe that no matter what it does, it will never be a part of the European system. So that strengthened the hands of people like Erdogan in Turkey. And Turkey's internal and insecure geopolitical environment facilitates the authoritarian system in Turkey. We live in such an insecure and unstable region that we need strong leadership. That's the impression being given to the layperson on the street in Turkey. And this exists in all countries, as all illiberal systems as well, but there is the siege mentality in Turkey. The AKP promoted the propaganda that Erdogan's Turkey is being attacked by a coalition of outside powers, so they called for national unity. We witnessed it during Gezi protests of 2013, during the corruption probe, and now regarding the criticism, regarding the protest against this very strong executive presidential system that came with the referendum. After the coup attempt of last summer, and the following state of emergency, which seems to that will be there forever, and the very much contested referendum in mid-April this year, I think Turkey has seen the most radical authoritarian shift. So there is a discussion now that whether Turkey can be classified as an illiberal regime, like the other regimes in the industry in Europe, or is it a full authoritarian state? If you look at the current constitution we have after the contested referendum, it's a very strong executive system because it concentrates the power in the hands of the president without any checks or balances. I can explain more with your questions. And the most worrying thing is that the fear factor has become the major defining element of politics in recent years. The AKP and Erdogan securitized the dissent in Turkey. When people tried to protest, he said this is against the security of Turkey, or foreign powers are doing that. So in short, Erdogan's ideology, it leaned towards political Islam and in a very authoritarian system. But in a capitalist regime. I hope I didn't exceed my time.
No, it was just perfect. Thank you very much, Nilgün. Let's move to Hungary now. György, in 2012, you signed a New Year's appeal with other intellectuals and public figures who had opposed Hungary's communist regime in the 1970s, which outlines your concerns about Hungary's new constitution. Let me quote from it. In Hungary, liberal democracy, as interpreted in the West, has come to an end. The autonomy of power centers has become a formality. The government is solely anti-democratic, unquote. Later on, you were talking about dictatorial rule. Orban himself coined the term illiberal state. Where do those ideas come from in Hungary? Are these ideologies more of an instrument of power as well, of a captured state? Or is there a specific model for society envisioned by the ruling elite as well as in the majority of the society? György, the floor is yours.
Я вообще...
It's okay.
Вы меня слышите, да? Да. Вообще, антилиберализм был уже в начале, в самом начале изменения системы в Венгрии. Были антилиберальные настроения. То есть такие настроения всегда было и ненависть к либералам, которая превратила это слово в ругательство, так же, как в России говорили о демократах, и это было как ругательство. Может быть. Но не было никакой антилиберальной теории. Но не было никакой антилиберальной теории, а была просто практика. А сам Виктор Орбан называл вот ту практику, которая при его правительстве в Венгрии началась, иллиберальным. И к тому же он называл это иллиберальной демократией. Но я думаю, что такие вещи не существуют, потому что не может быть без свободы. Без идеи свободы нет демократии. Но он считает, то есть не только он, но и та элита, которую он представляет, считает, что демократия – это власть большинства. И так как у него так называемые 2/3, он считает, что это достаточно для легитимности своей власти. Ну, что это такое 2/3? Он имеет эти голоса. Голоса, которые он не имеет, происходят от тех граждан, которые вообще не голосуют. То есть примерно, скажем, 50% от 64% это его голоса. Вообще это такая тенденция, и не только в Венгрии. Такая тенденция, что вот эти новые правые, они раскололи общество надвое. То есть 50-50. Ты можешь быть только или правым, или левым, и это вот этот раскол общества приведет не только в Венгрии к таким результатам. Подумай, что вот Брексит в Великой Британии это 50%, 50%, тех, которые вообще подали голоса. Посмотрим в Венгрии. Были референдумы, а в референдуме только 50-50% считается. Я думаю, что это 50-50 самое опасное, что может случиться с обществом, потому что суггерирует мнение, как будто на каждый вопрос есть только два ответа. И в моем понимании демократии бывает на каждый вопрос 50 ответов, не меньше. Ну, что за система этого? Это, конечно, не классическая диктатура, но это и не демократия в классическом смысле. Бывает, на Западе говорят иногда о личной диктатуре. Я думаю, что в Венгрии господствует личная демократия господина Орбана. Это такая демократия, которая его интересам соответствует. Но почему это вообще возможно? Это потому, что, конечно, либералы наши и социалисты, которые вместе с ними были у правительства, тоже не ангелы. У них тоже была своя демократия. Это демократия, да, для людей без диплома. Не было этой демократии. Люди с дипломом, люди, принадлежащие к элите, были составной частью этой демократии, а те, у которых социальное положение немножко похуже, они оказались вне этой демократии. И поэтому, но это только одна из причин, они поддерживали социально-политические течения, которые им обещали какие-то выгоды. Венгрия страна, с одной стороны, очень бедная, потому что миллионы вегетируют на границе социального минимума. С другой стороны, это очень богатая страна, если посмотреть, сколько стадионов в это время правительство строит. Стадионы построены, причем так, что это в самой деревне, где Орбан живет, там тоже стадион. Но я думаю, что все, что в Европе происходит, это от того, что сама демократия, как понятие, не имеет той силы, которая не имела в 89-м или в 90-м году. И ожидания Восточной Европы просто не были выполнены. И в этом, к сожалению, есть определенная ответственность европейского сообщества.
Thank you very much, György. As the current Polish government has said to take examples from Viktor Orbán, let's move to Poland now. Adam, in your newest report, Beneath the Surface of Illiberalism, the Recurring Temptation of National Democracy in Poland and in Hungary, with Lessons for Europe, you focus on right-wing populism rooted in ethnic nationalism. In your opinion, the nation rebuilding has become the spécialité de la maison of PiS and Fidesz. As we just listened to György's analysis on Hungary, I would suggest you explain to us where the understanding of the nation is most visible in Poland now and what it means for the development of democracy and where it comes from.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Moving smoothly from Poland to Hungary, as you rightly said, quite often our politicians, including Jarosław Kaczyński, mentioned Hungary as a source of inspiration for Poland. Kaczyński said, for instance, that he would like to have a second Budapest in Poland. And I would prefer to have Bucharest when you look at the demonstrations against the government who would like to change law concerning corruption. But nevertheless, in his famous speech in 2014 in Transylvania, Orban said that he's against liberal state, and he prefers not liberal democracy, but in fact illiberal state, namely nation state. And I think that's very important to describe developments in Poland and Hungary as a part of a wider phenomenon which can be described as a rise of this nationalistic right-wing populism, and it can be observed, this rise, to a very various degree in, let's put it that way, more or less in half of European member states. Poland and Hungary, of course, are very interesting cases. We have, of course, wide scope of different forms of this right-wing nationalistic populism, from soft version to hard version, but nevertheless, what is crucial that Poland and Hungary are unique cases because we have this kind of politicians in power. And in my opinion, these politicians generally they define the nation as a allegedly imagined nation as a monolith, homogeneous group which is to a certain degree a person. That's why in the Polish discourse you can hear this term sovereign. It's not it's like the name of a person, that sovereign did something, sovereign wants something, and so on, and that and it's exactly the nation. The nation is a sovereign, and the nation, of course, as a person has a will, the will of sovereign nation, and this will is a crucial pillar of democracy. So this democracy is defined as majoritarian democracy, and of course it brings us to this situation that this kind of democracy and this kind of definition of the nation doesn't like very much these kind of ideas like division of powers from Montesquieu, like checks and balances, or generally the rule of law, because if we believe so strongly in the sovereign will of nation, in this case we can say that law can constrain this rule or this sovereign will of nation, and in this case we prefer predominance of executive power, and of course this will should have personification in a strong leader. And of course this kind of definition of nation, mostly ethnic definition of nation, which is based on this idea that we have common ethnic roots, ancient roots, that, for example, language plays an enormous role, religious as the main point of reference, not citizenship, not state, is to a large degree in the opposition to the civic definition of nation. The clash between these two visions of nations, which are not, should not be perceived as one only positive and the other one only negative, because quite often the borders between them are blurred, and the nationalism can move from one category to another. We have Janus phase of nationalism, but nevertheless, in my opinion, the EU is based on the civic nationalism, which is constrained by the rule of law, and ideas like minority rights, individual rights, and so on. And we can observe this clash of ethnic nationalism and civic nationalism, for instance, during the elections in France, where Madame Le Pen certainly in her political discourse is closer to this ethnic nationalism, and Macron presented more civic-oriented nationalism. That's a pity, because when you compare the discourse, rhetoric of Polish politicians from the ruling elite with Madame Le Pen, immediately it will turn out that their discourse is more ethnic oriented than in case of Madame Le Pen. It's a good example how a wide scope of different forms of this right-wing nationalistic populism we can observe right now in Europe. Of course, this kind of definition of nation, ethnically based, which is rather exclusive, has serious negative impact, in my opinion, on the political system, on the quality of democracy. And what is going on in Poland and in Hungary, in my opinion, with our democracies is strongly related to this definition of nation. And by the way, I'm also expert on Turkey, and I have been many times to this country. I speak Turkish, so just to add, in my opinion, also in case of Erdogan and his ideology, nationalism, mixed with Islam, especially Sunni Islam, plays an enormous role, especially right now when Erdogan is trying to gain votes among far-right nationalists.
Thank you for this analytical insight, Adam. Charles, being an expert on European studies, also specializing actually on Hungary and also Poland before, but sitting in the US, you might paint for us the broader picture, as already Adam started showing us some comparisons and similarities, but maybe you could actually paint for us a broader picture from a transatlantic perspective. How do those developments in Europe, also in comparison to the recent evolvement in the US, actually around Trump and his voters, his fans, look like? I mean, do you see mutual links, a global trend towards illiberality, sourced in the fear of losing control? Or do you see a coincidence in parallel processes in specific countries and societies arising from the characteristics of national history, economic and social conditions, culture, religions, and so on?
Answering all those questions would take me about 3 hours, and I will not use 3 hours, but just a few minutes. I will begin, if you may be interested in that in 1989 I was here in Dansk, accompanying as a specialist on Central Europe 4 senators, 4 United States senators, and we first in Warsaw talked to then Prime Minister Rokowski, who assured us, and I think he was candid, that the era of communism was over, because he had been told by Gorbachev that Soviet tanks will not protect what was then called, some of you may remember the phrase, People's Poland. That was a shocking statement for the people that I accompanied, the 4 senators, but then we came here to Dansk to meet Mr. Walenza and others, and our hopes were genuinely very, very high. We expected not only the collapse of communism, which has happened, but we also expected the growth, the gradual growth of a free market economy and political democracy. For me, I can't speak obviously for the 4 US senators, but for me, what I see now, especially in Hungary and Poland, but also in Slovakia, and also even in Romania, and of course especially in Russia, what I see now is that our hopes were unwarranted, and the backtracking from the initial 1990s trend towards pluralism and towards the free market economy, that trend now has been stopped and indeed reversed. So the main question that I will ask here is, why are democracies in this part of the world, but also I believe elsewhere, including the United States, why are the democracies in retreat? And I'm going to give you 4 or 5 reasons for that in outline form, because the wonderful chair lady will not give me the 3 hours that I need for further details. Okay. Well, first, the problem is with us. That's the main reason, and we should understand it and accept it. The domestic elites, I'm talking about elites, not specifically you. Of course, we're all in this room totally innocent. We've always done and thought the right things. But outside this room, the elites have failed us. They have failed us in many ways. One is that is corruption, enormous corruption throughout Europe and the United States as well, that has led wide populations to oppose the democratic system that they blame for the corruption. Because under communism, now in this part of the world at least, corruption was not as visible as it is today, because there were no free newspapers, etc., etc. And so while people knew that, let's say in Romania, Ceausescu had used public money for all kinds of private purposes, but by and large, the people did not know the enormous corruption under communism. Now they do. I think what we also see in many countries, in Western Europe too, is a democratic deadlock. Certainly in the United States, it's very clear that there is such polarization among parties and among people that decisions are not made. Decisions are delayed, postponed, because the process does not allow for sufficiently quick and efficient decision making. And the people blame democracies for that. And one other point I would make here is that the urban, somebody mentioned that before, but the urban-rural differences and conflicts have surfaced to a very great extent. Just to give you an American example, although Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes, but the system was such that fairly, that Trump won the election. In Washington, D.C., where I live, 93% of the people, city people, voted for Hillary Clinton. But in the countryside, even just a couple of 100 miles away, the picture was totally different. The country is divided between cities, large cities in particular, and the countryside. And I don't know quite what to do about it, probably not much. Now, the second set of causes that I see for the democratic retreat has to do with the internet. The internet is a blessing, because there is so much. You can make phone calls free some of the time. That's great. I use that a lot. I can talk to my grandchildren, for example, through the internet. I can see them. You can use Twitter. You can use this and that. It has some advantages. On the other hand, it provides for the illusion of freedom. That, well, things are not so bad. We can still talk to each other. We can still, in illiberal or dictatorships such as Turkey's, we can still live a life via the internet. It's a good escape, but it is not democracy. It is not freedom. It is good to have. Mind you, it's not just a curse. It is a blessing as well, but it is not enough to call some of these countries free. Even in Russia, the internet is almost completely free. The third reason for democratic retreat is the revival of Russia and its ambitions. It's a long subject, but you all know about financing by Russia, in whether it's France or Hungary, encouraging corruption, encouraging, oddly enough, far-right regimes to far-right parties to make themselves felt. The problem is that Russia cannot come to terms with the demands for modernization and indeed westernization. The conditions of the country outside of Moscow or St. Petersburg are awful. So what do they do instead? They talk about and act on the basis of great Russian chauvinism. Witness Ukraine, witness Syria, and witness Georgia, about which we heard earlier today. So Russia is the enemy of liberal democracy, or just democracy in general, and with financing and very clever secret police activities, as we saw in the United States, is extremely effective. And speaking of Europe, I have to say, finally, the fourth point about the United States. As the election outcome in the United States is a tragedy for Europe. It's a tragedy for Europe, not only because of NATO, that we saw yesterday, and somebody mentioned that already. The main issue here is that the United States, for better or worse, guaranteed European freedom now, at least West European freedom, and then since 1989, all European freedom in Europe. And this is now under review, let's put it this way, and depending on what day or what hour you listen to President Trump, you cannot know exactly where the United States stands. I am sorry to say that, that you cannot count on the United States as the defender of democracy and freedom in Europe. This is politically an extremely dangerous trend, and I don't expect it to be reversed very soon. In conclusion, let's just say that the democratic process is not quite enough. Democracies have to produce, and they have produced for the elites, and not enough for the masses, which is why we have the urban-rural dichotomy so strongly in the United States, but also in this country. Well, I guess we will talk about other issues of what to do a little bit later. I will just say that we see the outlines of a bad situation. What we don't see is whether this is just a setback or it's a historic retreat. I'm unclear in my own mind, and that's a question I don't want you to ask because I don't have the answer.
Well, thank you very much, Charles, for this analytical insight, for the information, but also a bit worrying words, and that exactly makes us come then to the second question, to the second round I would like to discuss with you. Exactly as you already said, Charles, so what do we do now? What are the practical ideas for moving forward and possible recommendations? So this time I will actually ask you all the same question. So how should we as citizens, scholars, activists, writers, and so on, what role also play international organizations like the European Union or other international communities, the European Council? What role do you see them for? So maybe this time we will actually do the same round. So maybe Nilgün, you start.
Thank you. Well, the first thing that comes to one's mind, to the democratic mind, is the domestic democratic means to beat these illiberal regimes or authoritarian regimes. This was tried twice in Turkey and succeeded to a certain extent. Afterwards, it was manipulated by AKP. In June 2015, the AKP lost its majority in the parliament. But then the political atmosphere was manipulated mainly by Erdogan. He didn't let a coalition to be formed between AKP and the main opposition party. Afterwards, he didn't give the mandate when this coalition was not formed, and the political tradition in Turkey requires that the mandate should be given to the head of the main opposition party. It hasn't been done in Turkey, and afterwards Turkey entered a period of heightened violence and terrorist attacks. And early election was called. Through the pro-government media, AKP convinced the voters that unless AKP gets the majority in the parliament again, the country would remain in a chaos, in a dangerous chaos. And then in the early elections in November 2015, again AKP got the majority. In the last constitutional, very much contested constitutional referendum, I say it is contested because both the constitutional, both the referendum campaign and the referendum itself were contested because the level of, there was an enormous uneven level of playing field. The opposition parties had limited access to media, limited access to resources. 14 MPs, members of the parliament from the second opposition party were imprisoned. 80 mayors of the opposition parties, 80 local municipalities were governed by trustees appointed by the government. In these circumstances, and no voters were blamed to be terrorists by the president himself. After all, in the referendum, the High Election Board, that is supposed to be an autonomous body, changed the electoral vote after the end of the referendum, and it stated that unsealed ballots will also be accepted. Even in such a contested referendum, 49%, as you mentioned, György, in Hungary, 49% of the people voted no for a super executive presidency. Mainly, like in the case in United States, 17 big cities voted no, including Ankara, Istanbul, Izmir, and other cities. You can say that educated urban people voted no for this super executive presidency. But unfortunately, here we are with a very strong authoritarian presidential system. You mentioned European Union. Just before coming to European Union, I would like to mention that all the important international organizations like OSCE, Council of Europe, European Parliament, they criticize both the referendum campaign and the referendum itself, but the AKP government didn't care. Unfortunately, the EU lost its impact on Turkey when it is much needed because EU stopped criticizing Turkey. They didn't say anything during the referendum campaign, mainly because of the very important, crucial refugee deal EU has made with Turkey last March. The only fortunate side, the only glimmer of hope in Turkey, Turkey doesn't suffer from resource curse. We don't have natural resources. So Achilles' heel in Turkey is economy. Now there's an enormous wide discussion in European Union and Turkey depends a lot on trade and foreign investment on EU, and the parties are about to upgrade the customs union they've had since mid-90s. The discussion in EU is to put good governance conditionalities to upgrade the customs union. I don't know, maybe this might work because external pressure coming from these intergovernmental institutions didn't work. Mind you, maybe you don't know, Council of Europe reinitiated the monitoring process for Turkey after 13 years. OSCE published a report on Turkey's constitutional referendum that it was opaque, it was not fair, and the results are contested. And Venice Commission, highly respected Venice Commission, warned Turkey that this constitution will carry Turkey to a full authoritarian system, but the government doesn't seem to care. So I have the same question as you mentioned. I mean, I think this is a historical retreat. This is not backsliding. I'm afraid this will be a historical retreat for Turkey. Thank you.
I'll wait for the translation. Yeah. Well, György, so what do you think? In Hungary, we haven't seen as much social protests as in the first year in Poland, for example. So what do you expect from scholars, citizens, also the European community to react on what's going on in Hungary?
Ну, классический русский вопрос в 90-м столетии были два вопроса: кто виноват и что делать. И я думаю, это кто виноват, это самое простое, почти все актеры политической жизни. Более-менее ответственны за то, что происходит. Но, а что делать? Я привык в 70-е, 80-е годы изучать слабости диктатуры. Потому что диктатуры падают не от своих преступлений, а от своих ошибок. Например, 1970 год, декабрь. Польское правительство повышает цены на основные продукты в католической стране примерно в дни Рождества. Это классическая ошибка. Ну, в Гданьске об этом не надо много рассказывать. Такие ошибки делают и наши, я бы сказать, личные демократии. Например, что не удалось Орбану и его коллегам? Однажды они хотели вдруг поднимать налог интернета в стране, где 72% населения имеют интернет. И получили за эту демонстрацию и отказались от этого плана. Второй пример. Орбан в своем немножко чаушескообразном методе хотел Олимпийские игры сделать в Венгрии. И тогда молодые люди, такое движение, которого до этого еще не существовало, они начали организовать референдум и собрали 260 тысяч голосов, а это значит, что референдум можно было бы сделать. Правительство Орбана настолько испугалось этого референдума, что они взяли обратно свои планы организовать Олимпиаду в Венгрии. Почему это интересно? Потому что все, по-видимому, оппозиция не всегда учитывает настоящие проблемы, которые занимают людей. Третий пример – это когда правительство решило закрыть все продовольственные и любые магазины в воскресенье, потому что там есть маленькая партия рядом с Орбаном, христианско-демократическая, но это немножко, я бы сказал, что это высмеивание христианства и демократии в одном слове. И вот христианская партия думала, что люди должны в воскресенье идти в церковь. Но дело в том, что люди думали, что все-таки лучше идти в продовольственный магазин или в плазу. И поэтому, чтобы избежать референдума, правительство взяло этот план обратно. Вот наша надежда сейчас на ошибки правительства. А со стороны оппозиции моя надежда, например, вот Орбан расклеивал по всей стране громадные плакаты «Остановите Брюсселя». Вот эти плакаты, это его плакаты, это на его совесть. Но почему-то единственная либеральная газета печатала эту плакату за деньги, как анонс, оплаченный анонс от правительства, хотя эта газета вообще против правительства. Единственное телевидение, которое было либеральным, тоже печатал на своем веб-сайте вот этот анонс правительства. Но я думаю, если вообще начинать что-нибудь с положением, это не публиковать правительственные анонсы за деньги, потому что это значит, что они самого себя относятся к самому себе несерьезно. Я лично, конечно, у меня 74 года, мой оптимизм направлен на то, что я еще 40 лет проживу, Это 8 выборов. И не может быть, что на одном выборе не было бы нормального правительства.
Well, thank you, György. Well, Adam, what do you expect from citizens, scholars, activists, how to react to liberal practices, policies, but also maybe especially in the Polish case, we know the debate of the last year. What do you think is helpful and what is actually counterproductive for the European Union and the international community, how to react on certain developments?
I think that, frankly speaking, I'm rather pessimistic, moderately pessimistic concerning the future of Poland. I think that a very serious challenge and is going to be uphill struggle for the scientists, experts, civil society and so on, is the system of values and mindset of the Polish society. As I said in my first intervention, the pillar of these illiberal trends is based mostly on this ethnic definition of nation, and in the history of every nation you can find examples of civic nationalism, ethnic nationalism, of course, but in this case, according to opinion polls conducted in Europe, for instance recently by the Pew Research Center, we can observe that Poles belong to these nations, European nations, which generally prefer this ethnic nationalism. And we can find these kind of nations also in Southern Europe, Greeks, Italians, for instance, they are similar to Poles. But in these countries we have a strong left-oriented populism, Syriza, or some kind of hybrid populism like Beppe Grillo, and the movement of 5 stars. Here in Poland and in Hungary, this populism is, as I said in my first intervention, rooted in this ethnic nationalism. And what is my first recommendation for people which are interested in counterbalancing, countering this kind of trends in Polish political system would be to reinvigorate great narrative about the nation, to present the nation, the Polish nation defined in civic terms, and to show that this kind of definition of the nation is a sort of precondition for Poland to belong to the European Union. Of course, I'm rather pessimistic because when I look at the Polish opposition, the Polish civil society quite often is underperforms, unfortunately. And we have a very deep polarization in this country, deepening. And unfortunately, when you look at the political discourse, both sides are using very exclusive language. Of course, I will put more blame on the government because they are in power, but nevertheless, you can hear from both sides that the opponents are traitors. Some politicians from governments are saying even that everyone who criticizes Poland outside Poland, Poland means in this case the Polish government, in fact ceased to be a Pole. So that's amazing that in a so homogeneous ethnically country you can have this ethnicization of politics, that somebody is your opponent, and in this case the political struggle is so strong that these kind of arguments that you are not Pole anymore are used against each other. And of course this ethnic structure that we are in fact the most homogeneous nation in the EU, we have quite a lot of, that's the new phenomena, seasonal, mostly seasonal labor immigrants from Ukraine, but nevertheless excluding this group, we are the most ethnically homogeneous nation. Of course, taking into account the legacy of history that the Polish nation, modern nation in the 20th century and at the end of the 19th century was mostly created through this ethnic nationalism. These factors, of course, are serious impediments for creating this grand narrative about the civic nation. And of course there are other factors which were mentioned by Professor Gatti. Internet. We should take into consideration very worrying results of opinion polls conducted in Europe, that according to the Eurobarometer from autumn last year, we are on the first position in the EU, our society, concerning our attitude towards social media as a source of credible, reliable information. More than half of Poles, around 55 of Poles, responded yes. This is a good source of information, reliable, social media, and less than 30% answered no. On the opposite pole, we would find Swedes. The Swedish people responded, 80% of them, no, it's not a reliable source of information because of trolling, fake news, and so on. So unfortunately, I think that a very important field that should be this arena of dialogue with society to convince people, because I see some lights in the tunnel, for instance, when people are asked about refugees. We have a group which 40% of Poles which are totally against any refugees from Middle East and North Africa, but at the same time around 30% is saying rather no. So we, for example, these people who are interested in this civic Polish nationalism should try to convince these people, and the internet is a very important field to find some dialogue with these people, to try to convince them to other vision of Polishness.
And may I just repeat one of my questions? How do you see the role of the European Union? Is it counterproductive to have this discourse on the European level, or is it helpful in defending certain values and principles the EU stands for? The role of the institutions of the European Union?
I think that this external pressure on Poland is to a large degree inevitable because of the nature of the EU. The basic foundation of the EU, as I said, is a civic nationalism rooted in the rule of law, especially after the Second World War. That, in theory, I hope we learn from the Second World War that the nationalism, civic nationalism, should be constrained by the rule of law. And that's why everything what is going on in Poland concerning identity politics, memory politics, but also the rule of law, I see correlations, linkages between these processes, these politics of our government, will meet with responses in the EU. So it's not the matter that the EU should react or not. I can't imagine the EU which will not react. And of course, what is crucial to engage in the dialogue with this part of society, which is the same in the case of our membership in the Eurozone. The majority right now is against, but again, around 40% is saying totally no, and around 25% is saying rather no. So to this group of people is crucial. These people who are like, oh my God, in English, this języczek uwagi. Okay, it's like that they are playing this pendulum between these two groups. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, Charles, the transatlantic view, but also in this context, maybe especially interesting for us is also the developments in the US themselves. Since the US, former or still superpower, you don't have the structure like the European Union, like institutions above you, that will watch what's going on. You are even more dependent on the reactions of scholars, citizens, activists. What do you think will happen
Okay,
in the US?
I will speak about the US then, because I think it's a good feeling to be optimistic. I am optimistic about the United States. Democracy, the roots of democracy are very, very deep. What I see is significant resistance. Just to cite a very known little fact that a small-time court, a judge in the state of Washington, nobody ever heard of them. Most people, certainly in Europe, don't even know where the state of Washington is, well, north of California. That judge could overrule the new president's incredible initiative to stop the flow of immigrants to the United States. And now it has been confirmed, that decision by the court has been confirmed, and there is nothing that Trump can do about it for the time being. Now maybe the Supreme Court at some point might rule differently, but by and large, the first thing to keep in mind that the rule of law in the United States appears to be holding, and it is strong. The second thing is that there is politics in the US Congress, and the Republican majorities there in both houses would like to be re-elected next year. Now, if they support Trump all the way, then they are not likely to be re-elected. It's as simple as that. There are some complications, and so the Republican majorities are in the process of re-evaluating their support for the Republican president. It's interesting to watch. Concurrently, the Democratic leadership is far better than the press suggests, in my judgment. Particularly the leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is calculating, serious, analytical, and I believe that the Democrats will come back in the 2018 elections to control certainly the Senate, but possibly the House as well. So the distribution of power in the United States will make it very difficult for the president to do much more harm as we go along. And thirdly, I would say that there is an extraordinary revival in American journalism. It is the single best period in the long history of American journalism. And it's not just the New York Times and the Washington Post, they are the best. But the Wall Street Journal on page 1 reports investigative journalism bringing out corruption already, not only corruption, but the Russia ties in the Trump administration. In short, democracy has not disappeared in America. We have a lousy president, in my judgment, who knows nothing about anything, and who probably wouldn't be able to point out where Poland is, let alone where Dansk is on the map. Other countries have ignorant leaders as well, but this one is really leading the way, let's say. And he will go away. Whether he will go away just in 4 years, when the next elections take place, or he will be compelled by impeachment procedures or others before, I don't know. But America will survive, and America will, like in basketball, we will bounce back like a ball. We'll bounce back when I hope I will be around to witness it, because I have to tell you that as an immigrant to the United States, I've been living there since 1957. Nearly all of my life, I've had 2 American-born wives, not at the same time, don't worry about that. 5 American-born children and 10 American-born grandchildren. I care deeply about the future of America, and I want to live long enough to see it bounce back to the pluralism and to a bit of tolerance towards people. The immigration law is particularly offensive when I consider that in 1957, we Hungarian refugees arrived in Austria and Yugoslavia, etc. And President Eisenhower was able to convince the US Congress to pass a law admitting 44,000 Hungarian refugees. And today, the United States is incapable of allowing any, for all practical purposes, any refugees from the Middle East or North Africa. It's a shameful period in American history, but I do believe that it will end. I will make just one more comment. Yeah? I agree with Mr. Dalos very much about focusing on domestic things. If democracies are to come back in some of the countries, it will be because of the Turkish people, because of the Russian people, the Hungarian people, the Polish people, not because of the international community. The international community is very weak. It speaks loud, but it does not do very much. It's incapable of action. For example, Hungary should have been disciplined by the European Union for at least 5 to 7 years. And it's, you know, I mean, they are like saying, don't do it. Like a teacher who says to the Hungarians, don't do it, but there's no consequences. The grade is still pretty good. Maybe it's not an A, but it's a B or whatever it is in Poland. I forgot now what your grading system is. But they deserve an F. And there is a great inflation in the international community. And we're not acting tough enough, and don't count, I'm speaking to Poles here. If you want to change the system, don't count on the outside, don't count on the outside world.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to give the floor to you. If you have questions, comments, share your views. Please be brief, we have 20 minutes left, and introduce yourself shortly. Who wants to start commenting, asking? Please.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Bardzo ciekawa dyskusja i wcześniej i teraz.
Czy Pan może się przedstawić?
Tak, moje nazwisko Węgrzyn Mariusz. Ja chciałbym w nawiązaniu do tej sesji zadać takie pytanie. Zgodzimy się chyba wszyscy, że demokracja narodziła się kiedyś w starożytnych Atenach i była to prawdziwa demokracja, jednak nie była to w żaden sposób demokracja liberalna. Stąd moje następne pytanie, może jeszcze jedna uwaga. W Polsce, a szczególnie no niestety jakby w Gdańsku, pojęcie liberalizmu jakoś w latach 90. kojarzyło się no, z pewną korupcją, z prywatyzacją, z niejasnościami. Stąd moje następne pytanie, jakby, czy no, mamy w sytuacji, w której rządziła partia liberalna przez 8 lat. Obecnie rządzi partia nieliberalna i odnoszę wrażenie jako obserwator, że część środowisk no, liberalnych uważa, że demokracja liberalna jest wtedy i tylko wtedy, kiedy rządzi partia liberalna, a kiedy do rządu dochodzi opozycja wobec partii liberalnej, wtedy nie mamy ani wolności, ani demokracji. No, coś takiego, taki sposób myślenia no jest z całym szacunkiem myśleniem lekko totalitarnym, bo demokracja i wolność jest wtedy tylko kiedy rządzą nasi. I niestety to bardzo było widać po wygraniu Trumpa, który rzeczywiście prezydentem jest specyficznym. Też wczoraj szczególnie było widać na spotkaniu przywódców NATO w Brukseli. No jednak został wybrany w sposób demokratyczny. I ostatnia moja uwaga jest tego typu. To jest pytanie o Europę. Jakby, czy europejska demokracja, czy Unia Europejska może być tylko liberalna w tym znaczeniu nadanym liberalizmowi w XXI wieku. Bo myślę, że ojciec liberalizmu, John Stuart Mill, który powiedział kiedyś, napisał nawet, że ta demokracja, liberalizm to nie jest dla barbarzyńców w takim sensie, że to liberalizm dla Johna Stuarta Milla wymagał pewnych korzeni kulturowych. Nie każdy mógł być liberałem, dlatego że ma demokratyczne wybory. To według Milla to by się nie udało. Można powiedzieć, że liberalizm dla Milla nie jest dla barbarzyńców, no, nawet dla postmodernistycznych barbarzyńców. O, i może ja bym tu skończył.
Dobrze, dziękuję bardzo. Next is Silke Tempel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Silke Tempel, I'm editor-in-chief of Internationale Politik and I'm with the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for having me here. It seems to me that in the discussion about the anti-liberal counter-revolution and also in the contribution by the gentleman just now, there is a confusion, or perhaps a deliberate confusion very often used also by those who want to go against liberal democracy, and that of course lies in the word of liberal. Perhaps it's easier if you could agree on, of course Athens is not the true form of democracy because it did not include not free men or women for that matter. We needed a couple of centuries to develop the kind of democracy that we have now, and it includes a few ingredients that are non-negotiable. One is separation of power, rule of law, checks and balances, and most important, the opportunity to discuss freely what we want to consider as our societal values without oppression. Now, when we come to a point, as we see with Hungary and Poland, and then of course with Turkey, where we have a slightly different case, where some of these ingredients that are non-negotiables for membership in the European Union are being harmed because checks and balances are being harmed or eroded, or because an independent judiciary is harmed or being eroded. I would not make do, with all due respect to you, Mr. Gatti, I'm sorry, that we should wait. We cannot do much from the outside, but the question rather is, especially for those members of the EU, what can they do to find a fine balance between, putting those who erode these pillars under pressure, which would make a bit of an impression, and B, keep the relationship with these huge groups within those society. It's 40 to 50%. It's almost half of the society that is in opposition to these developments, to keep the contacts alive with what we call civil society. With Turkey, it's a bit different because Turkey is not yet, unfortunately, a member of the European Union, but still, I would really like to know more about the means that would be at our disposal. For example, excluding Mr. Orban's party from the Conservative Party bloc within the European Parliament. Would that be an option? Keeping up a really close relationship with Turkish parliamentarians who were against the referendum and who did not vote for the unempowering of their own parliament. Or in Poland's case, again, to sort of strengthen the civil society, which I see to be so strong, and the city is just like a city like here in Gdansk. So if you had a few more ideas as to how we can help from the outside, it would really be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Silke. Are there more questions or comments on the floor before I go back to the panel? Not yet. So I guess, since I think the questions of Silke go especially to Nilgün and György, maybe Nilgün, you start?
I'll try to answer your question and then I'll ask a question myself as well. What can EU do about Turkey? As you said, the relationship with European Parliament and the parliamentarians who oppose this executive, super executive presidential system can be strengthened. Also, as I mentioned, some political conditionalities can be brought to further the economic cooperation between the parties, because Turkey, including Erdogan, is very much interested in economic cooperation with EU. Turkey definitely needs EU regarding for its economic interests. Like, I mean, 80% of foreign direct investment in Turkey comes from the EU, and it is a necessity to have a rule of law to invest in a country. That can be used by the EU. The cooperation between civil societies can be strengthened, but in this sense, there are three approaches towards Turkey. One approach is, I mean, that segment of the European society, let me say, who never wanted Turkey to be a member of the EU, no matter what Turkey does, and they are now using the current state of affairs in Turkey to exclude Turkey. The second approach towards Turkey is those who want to have a transactional relationship with Turkey, especially in the refugee issue. So they disregard what is going on in Turkey for the sake of transactional relationship. This is what Leonidas Donski mentioned in his speech yesterday. This is, I mean, pushing away values for the realpolitik. I think Turkish civil society has to cooperate with the civil societies who adopt the third approach. They have supported Turkey so much when Turkey was making democratic reforms, when the consolidation of democracy process went on in Turkey. Now they are rightly criticize what is going on in Turkey. As an institution, I can give European Parliament as an example, and there are many civil society institutions like Heinricha Bölla Foundation who adopt this approach. I think Turkish civil society have to strengthen its cooperation with these types of civil societies. My question will be that, I mean, European Union has an important instrument in its sense to deal with the illiberal regimes in Poland and Hungary, to sustain their voting rights in the Council of European Council. And it is being referred as a nuclear option. Why it is a nuclear option? Because this is a real sanction, this is a serious sanction, I think. This is my question. And this will be an example, this will be an example for Turkey as well, because Erdogan keeps referring to the fact that, look at your member states, Poland and Hungary, before criticizing us.
György, would you answer to Silke's and also to Nilgün's question?
Это довольно сложный вопрос, потому что на референдуме 94% венгров были за принадлежность Европейскому Союзу, и я не думаю, что это сейчас изменилось. Но в то же время Евросоюз и Европарламент отражает не просто отношение к Венгрии, но имеет свои внутренние проблемы. Например, вот эта так называемая партийная семья Орбана, ЦДУ, они целые годы растратили на то, чтобы превратить венгерских правых в вегетарианцев. И я думаю, что они ошиблись. А теперь начинаются санкции с лишения голоса Фидес в этой партийной семье. Но это так медленно, этот процесс, что потеряет всякую силу. Потом, конечно, исключить из Евросоюза можно. Но иногда у меня такое впечатление, как будто Фидес этого хочет. Если кто-нибудь видел, и многие видели вот этот снимок в Пекине, Орбан между Лукашенко Эрдоган. Вообще эта кампания, его нерациональное влечение с такими странами, как Беларусь, Казахстан, Азербайджан, я иногда думаю, что мы переоцениваем интеллектуальные способности и рациональность наших политиков. Мне кажется, что он лично готов пожертвовать даже членством в Евросоюзе, если это будет условием его власти. А вдруг, с другой стороны, он не совсем, не во всем отказывается в Европе, потому что европейские деньги ему нужны. И есть возможность в некотором смысле оказать финансовое давление, на самом деле, например, не финансировать эту политику, а Евросоюз финансирует эту политику.
Are there more questions on the floor? Otherwise, I would give Adam and Charles the chance to react to the questions, but also having the last word, because in 5 minutes our time is over. So this is the last chance to have a question? No. Okay, then Adam and then Charles.
Okay, maybe I will focus on this issue. What does it mean, liberal democracy, currently, in current conditions? I think that in Poland and in Hungary, that's quite funny, especially in case of Hungary, because the national hero of this country, Lajos Kossuth, in the middle of 19th century, he said many times, I'm a liberal, I'm very proud of being liberal, and being liberal means to be a real Hungarian, a genuine Hungarian. So when you look at the narrative about liberalism in both countries, liberalism currently sounds like offense, insult, label, something like that. And when you look at the current state of affairs in this conflict, tensions between the European Commission and the European Parliament and Poland, for instance, what we can observe, and I agree with Miss Sylvia that said that it's not the matter of liberalism, illiberalism, but the rule of law. And in this case, these checks and balances, separation of powers, and so on. And in my opinion, that's the basic foundation of democracy, any democracy. And in this case, the Venice Commission voted on the case of Polish Constitutional Tribunal 1 to 132. Only one member of this commission supported the position of Polish government. It was a Hungarian representative. Only one guy among 133 persons. And the same in the case of the European Parliament. 2 resolutions concerning the internal situation in Poland were endorsed by the European Parliament, and these resolutions gained a very widespread support from center-right to left. Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Liberals, Greens, and so on. And the proportion was as such that around 75% of MPs, European deputies, voted for these resolutions. Less than 25% supported the position of Polish government, taking into consideration that pretty soon the UK will leave the European Union. In this case, this proportion is like 80%, more than 80% critical of the situation in Poland, and less than 20% of MPs, mostly from parties like Front National, supporting the position of Poland. And also Fidesz, of course, supporting Poland in this case. So I think that we are having the clash with the mainstream, which in Poland is presented, that's again a little bit funny situation, that we are against the elites and representing the European nations, that the narrative of the Polish Prime Minister, but these guys were elected to the European Parliament by sovereign nations, and they are representatives of the great majority of our societies.
There's a huge difference between what one can expect to happen by the international community and what should happen. I fully share the views that was expressed about what should happen. Yes, the membership of Hungary, not just a voting right, I think should have been suspended. Financial inflow from the European Union, which comes from the taxpayers of the member states, should have been stopped years ago. I have written extensively on this subject. But it is one thing to encourage each other about what should be done, and another is to realize what is being done. And what is being done is discouraging. In the 1990s, the United States paved the way for the enlargement of NATO. I happened to be on the policy planning staff of the Department of State and worked very, very hard on that. It wasn't easy, but we hoped that we would encourage the European Union to follow suit, and indeed they did, in the expectation that the new members will gradually adopt the rule of law. They will have democratic rights and minority rights recognized as in Western Europe. This is a disillusionment, a disappointment, and neither the United States nor the European Union know how to deal with it. I am totally familiar with all the attempts to exclude Hungary from the EPP, but it hasn't happened. And there is good reason for that. It's political in each country, particularly Germany, where the Merkel government is represented, of course, in the EPP, and they are worried that if Fidesz leaves the the EPP, then the Social Democrats and the Liberals can take the leading role within the European Union. In other words, there are many reasons. In America, Eastern Central Europe is off the agenda. It is just not. You have to understand what is before you begin to think about what should be. Yes, what should be is exactly what you expressed. I referred to it and others, particularly with respect to Turkey, because Turkey is not an illiberal state. It is a dictatorship. Russia is not an illiberal state. It's a dictatorship. And finally, about Poland, one word about that. In my political map, I say to the Hungarians that they are about 3 or 4 years behind Russia developing a centralized state, indeed a dictatorship. And I would say that Poland is about 3 or 4 years behind Hungary. So there is still time here for civil society in particular to resist the temptation of the new government here to adopt the ways of their Hungarian brothers.
Well, it's lunchtime, ladies and gentlemen, so that leaves me saying thank you very much to our panelists and sharing your insights with us. Thank you very much for being an interested and very patient audience. I think we have 1.5 hours of a break now, and at 3:30 the debates will go on. Thank you.